there are many insights from Buddhism as well as...
Dr. Bala, we are starting the session.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Welcome back to Business and Neuroscience and Indian. Welcome back to the today's session and Symposium 6 and the international webinar on concept of consciousness, neuroscience and Indian philosophical perspective. This is symposium is on consciousness during sleep, and as you know, we spend 1/3 of our life sleeping, and we experience different thoughts, perceptions, negative and positive emotion during sleep, and there is different physiological and behavioral state during different stages of the sleep, and how and during these different stages, and there is a various thoughts, perceptions, emotion we see, and how these perceptions, different emotions and thoughts are generated during sleep, when actually human mind is away from the fact that what is mind is where the person is, like when mind is in when person is in sleep and there is no external stimulus as such. So how these thoughts are generated and emotions and perceptions. So there are different viewpoints from the philosophical views, from neuroscientific views, that how consciousness during sleep is, and there is need to integrate this philosophical, phenomenological and neuroscientific consideration and to arrive at a common consensus that what actually is happening during this sleep in terms of consciousness, dreaming, and our behavioral state and physiological states. So philosophically and physiologically, phenomenologically, we need to look into with time in future also. So in this regard, this symposium is, and I would like to invite Dr. Ravindra PN is with me to chair this session. Dr. Ravindra PN is an associate professor in Center for Consciousness Studies in Department of Neurophysiology, NIMHANS, and his main interest is in the neuroscience of consciousness during sleep and meditation. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Gulshan. So, and I welcome again all of you for this afternoon session. It's really very interesting that all the last 3 days we were discussing about the different perspective of understanding consciousness. And we have been hearing that, okay, wake, sleep, dream state, deep sleep state, and also beyond these 3 states has also been very much described in the Indian classical text, and also where the meditation practices can also reach to higher states of consciousness, surpassing all these 3 different states like wake, dream, and the deep sleep state. So from the neuroscience perspective, to try to understand consciousness, we have a different models. Where or the behavioral state, which we can really try to understand. One is the wake, and probably second is the sleep, and in this, and what happens during sleep and what happens during REM, during the dream state, and what happens during the deep sleep state, because in these 2 states, brain is in a different oscillatory mode, and how all these things can really bring about a rich phenomenological experience that happens during dream, and also what is the difference in the phenomenological experience, especially that also happens during the deep sleep state. So why both the philosophical understanding, especially in context with Indian philosophical traditions, and also from the neuroscience, is very important, because we have a very rich the philosophical treatise exclusively dedicated in describing in depth about the phenomenological experiences of all these 3 states in the Upanishadic literature. So therefore, we thought, okay, we will have the panel of the experts from both the field So we have two experts from the philosophy and one from the neuroscience perspective, who is very well known for his sleep research. So I once again welcome for all of you, and I would like to introduce Brahmachari Ajata Chaitanya, who is the assistant professor in the Department of Computer Science at Ramakrishna Mission Vivekananda Educational Research Institute. And he is a BE, he has an engineering background from National Institute of Technology and also PhD from Pennsylvania State University. And he has a very rich experience in deep learning and machine learning, and also in the mathematics like linear algebra, matrix computation, and also the fact that he has been motivated to get into the meditation and also for the spiritual way of life. So he's also in the process of becoming a monastic member. So because of his both experience as an academic from the science perspective and also has his life being a spiritual practitioner perspective, right? So it's quite natural that he also has interest in understanding the foundations of yoga, especially with Patanjali Yoga Sutra in depth, and also specifically how these yoga practices or this yogic text has been describing about the phenomenology of the sleep. So, Maharaj, we are very happy that you have honored our invitation. Then I request Brahmachari Ajata Chaitanya to share his ideas on cognition in sleep from the yogic view perspective. I think you're not audible.
Namaste, Dr. Ravindra. Thank you so much for introducing me, and thank you for inviting to this excellent platform. I have been listening to some lectures since yesterday, and it is wonderful. So I'm really humbled to have this opportunity, and I would like to share my limited views and knowledges that I have acquired. So with these few words, I am going to start my presentation. I hope I can do a screen sharing.
You can share the screen.
This one. So at the onset, I would like to pay my regards to Professor Bala Ganapati Devarakonda, Professor of Philosophy at the University of Delhi, also co-speaker in this particular session. My regards to Dr. Martin Bressler, who is at the University of Redbaum, the Medical Center, and has done excellent work on cognition in sleep. I also looked at your website, and you have done very good work on some experimental research that is really exciting. My regards to Dr. Ravindra for inviting me. My regards to Dr. Bindu Butti, who is also an honorable member of the CCS-NIMHANS. And my regards to all the participants so far in this webinar. Today, I'm going to talk about the possibility of cognition in sleep. And what does yogic view tell about it? So we understand what is sleep. We experience sleep every day. We understand cognition. We have knowledge about cognition, various kinds of cognition. We know what they are. So if we put these things together, cognition and sleep, how it comes? Is it possible? Is it not possible? Is it possible to some extent? Or are there more things to it? So my brief talk would hover around these points. First of all, we would like to know whether sleep is really unconscious. Because usually when we sleep, we say we are not aware of many things. So is that really an unconscious state? What does yoga say about it? And how does Vedantic view corroborate that view of yoga? Then I would like to dwell upon the cognition, the mechanism of cognition that is according to yogic view. And then how sleep and cognition, they are linked. And does sleep really help in cognition? Is it possible to have some cognition in sleep? Or how does sleep play an important role in cognition of other states? And finally, the very, very interesting and enigmatic topic of Samadhi that is very crucial to the yogic view, how sleep and Samadhi are related. That is going to be my last point. So here we go. So is sleep really unconscious or completely unconscious? How can we assess that? How can we know that? How can we say conclusively about that? So let us recall our experiences in sleep. Sometimes we wake up and say, I slept happily. Vyasa says, Sukham aham aswapsam prasannam me manaha. I am happy. After I get up from sleep, I feel very happy. My mind is so cheerful. Sometimes we also say, I slept unhappily. Dukham aham aswapsam styanam me manaha. This is also according to Vyasa. And sometimes we say, I was completely unconscious in sleep. Garam murham aswapsam klantam me chittam. That means I did not know anything. So we have so many different kinds of experience of consciousness in sleep. So can we really say sleep is unconscious? What happens to the mind during sleep? Is it there? Is it working? Is it in vegetative state? Is it active? What is the state of the mind? And if accordingly, can there be any learning in the sleep state? So this is really a lot of surprises and unknown arenas are there. So it's an enigmatic thing that we really have encountered. So let us try to find what yoga is telling about whether sleep is unconscious or conscious. The statement that is given in various yogic texts, particularly in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, is that sleep is a void state. It is called the Abhava Pratyaya Alambana Vritti Nidra. Sleep or Nidra is a particular state of mind which is void, but it is not a complete void. That means it is not a state where there is nothing. There is a void of something, but it is not that there is nothing. It's not a complete void. Abhava iti jagrad vishaya abhavaha natu atyanta abhava eva. That is a very clear statement given in yogic texts. It is not a complete void. Therefore, it is internally conscious. It is sushupto antah sangaha. Antah sangha means that internal conscious. It is not conscious about the external world because there is no objectification. Mind does not take the form of any external objects. But that does not mean there is no consciousness at all. It is internally conscious. So there is no cognition. We understand in sleep we cannot cognize the external world because the mind does not take the form of external objects. It is said this way, buddhir vishaya akara parinama abhavaha. There is no modification of the mind that takes the form of the properties of the external objects. So therefore, there is no cognition of external objects. But that does not rule out the presence of consciousness. It is not a complete void. It is internal conscious state, which we really could not see clearly based on our experience. Therefore, these texts have clearly said and analyzed and logically established this state. So based on these statements, we can come to a conclusion that sleep is conscious, but it is dull in the sense that there is no cognition of external world. So there is no actually awareness of the external world, hence it is dull. This is the crux of the yogic view about the consciousness in sleep. The state of consciousness in sleep. This is the main information according to yogic texts. How does this relate with the Vedantic view? Is the Vedantic view, which is also a very important pillar in the study of consciousness, is it completely different from the yogic view, or there are similarities? For that, we have put this Vedantic view side by side. So according to Vedantic view, the principal Upanishad, Mandukya Upanishad, talks about the 3 states of consciousness and also the 4th state. There it is clearly said that the third stage, sleep, is a mass of undivided consciousness. So again, it is also telling the same thing, that there is consciousness in sleep, and that consciousness is actually undivided. That means it has become one. There is no division, or there is no fragmentation of the consciousness. It has become one, as it were. Okay. So that's the idea. That's the main point that relates the yogic view and the Vedantic view. Not only that, the Vedanta also says that it is sleep. The consciousness of sleep is basically a source of consciousness to waking and dream states, other states. That means it is as if the repository from which dream and the waking state is borrowing consciousness. Therefore, that name is given as Cheto Mukha. It's the source from where the consciousness of waking and dream states are coming. It's not unconscious. It's a mass of consciousness. But yet, although it is conscious, it is dull. Aviveka rupatvat pragyana ghana. That means this pragya that has become one mass is because it is not divided. And when it is not divided, there is no viveka, there is no knowledge of the multifarious things. So therefore, it is aviveka rupa, and because of that, it is pragyana ghana. So the Vedantic view, principally coming from the Mandukya Upanishad, is also in line with the yogic view about the consciousness of sleep state. So in one word, both Vedanta and yoga says that sleep is conscious, not unconscious. Here I would like to present a quick snapshot of various stages of sleep that has been found through scientific experiments. And in the language of neuroscience, it is called the Sushupti is called the slow wave sleep, and the Swapna, or the dream state, is the REM sleep. Where what is the difference in these states? The difference happens in the different brain waves, where we find that in Sushupti, the delta waves are delta waves which are of high amplitude and low frequency. They are more predominant, whereas in the REM stage, the theta waves, which are of low amplitude and high frequency, they are more predominant. So this is just a quick snapshot of what we have found through brain research and neuroscientific evidences. Now, cognition, what do you understand by cognition? We understand this, that perception, attention, learning, memory, reasoning, judgment, problem solving, these are all components of cognition according to cognitive psychology, right? So we have experience of this. We have well-defined way of measuring and analyzing these components of cognition. Having known that, let us see how yogic view talks about cognition. What is the mechanism of cognition according to yoga? So here is a picture. So according to yoga, cognition, one of the cognition is pratyaksha, that is direct perception, which we encounter most of the time in our waking state. How does that occur? This is the mechanism. When the sense organs come into contact with the external objects, then the mind takes the form of the properties of that object, and hence cognition occurs. Right. So this picture actually highlights that mechanism. There is an object on the right hand side, and here is the mind. So the mind actually, as it were, flows out through the sense organs, which is the eye in this case, and then takes captures all the information from the object, and that is the shape of the object, the properties of the object, all the information that is acquired, and all that comes back to the mind, and therefore mind has information about the object. So it is the mind that is the source of the cognition and also the sink where the cognition is occurring. So if this is the mechanism of cognition, then we understand that cognition is nothing but a special state of mind which is called chitta vritti, or the particular kind of modification. So according to yoga, all knowledge is acquired through some chitta vritti, that is the modification of the mind stuff. And there are two types of vritti according to yogic text. One type, the major type, is called the afflicted or the klishta vritti, which gives rise to the feelings of pleasure and pain. Basically, these modifications create emotions. And according to yoga, the rajas and tamas, they are the principal forces behind these afflicted mental state, that is the klishta vritti. So these are called the rajas tamomayim vritti. So basically, it is the result of the action of rajas and tamas, which are two principal forces. Whereas the unafflicted vrittis or the aklishta vritti, they are responsible for the cognition. These modifications gives rise to cognition or knowledge. So that is why they are also called bodha vritti or khyati vishaya vritti. Now, why these are different from klishta vrittis? Because they are free from rajas and tamas, and they are full of sattva. It is vidhuta rajas tamaso buddhi sattva. That means it is completely devoid of these rajas and tamas, and therefore it is principally full of sattva, and because of sattva, the knowledge or the cognition happens. So as we have seen in the previous instance, that there is an object in front of us and the mind is cognizing that object. That means the particular modification that is happening to the mind is a form of aklishta vritti, which is full of sattva, and therefore the cognition is occurring. Now Patanjali has given 5 types of cognition, and here is the list. What we will see is that how does these different cognition map with the different stages. That is, the stages that we pass through in a day is Jagrat, Swapna, Sushupti. According to Patanjali, these are the vritti jnanas, or the cognition that is possible in the mind because of aklishta vritti. And here are the stages, and this is the mapping of the vritti jnana with the stages or the avastha. Now in this, what we would like to highlight is the sleep has been given a special state of cognition. Sleep is not only a conscious state, but according to yoga, it is also a cognitive state. It is a particular form of vritti jnana that has been assigned. It has been given a special place, different from other vritti jnanas, and it only occurs in the state of sushupti. So this is something to be noted in the view of yogic texts. Now, here I have given a snapshot of various cognitive functions across various states. This is from a book, Fundamentals of Cognitive Neuroscience. Here, what I would like to highlight is that when we are awake, we have conscious experience of the external world, which is mostly externally generated, and the thought is actually logical and then progressive. We progress from one thing to the other thing. Our thoughts, our understanding progresses, and it is logically connected. And this is what is called as the bahish pragya. That is, we are aware of the external world. The awareness is basically driven by the external world. That is our jagrat or waking state. In the dream state, it is basically antapragya. It is not governed by the external world, but it is governed by mostly of the internal experiences that are stored in form of memory. So there, the thoughts are not always necessarily logical. They can be illogical and bizarre, but it is very vivid. It is not hazy. It is vivid because it is just like it is mimicking the external, the waking state. That's why the statement is Jagrat Bat Ababhashate. It mimics the waking state. That is why it is vivid. But that is not driven by any external object. So it is Vishaya Shunya Pragya. It is only just a impression. But in sleep, it is different. The cognitive function in sleep state is different from Jagrat and Swapna. How is it different? First of all, there is no conscious experience of sensation and perception and these kind of things which we experience in the external in the waking state. That is not there. But that perception being absent, thought is not absent. There is a preservative thought. It is a continuation of a similar thought chain. There is no fragmentation of thoughts, but it is not absence of thoughts. There is a thought. And that is what is called as Pragyana Ghana. Eki Bhutaha Pragyana Ghana. And this Pragyana Ghana, that is the this amorphous consciousness, mass of consciousness comes because it is not divided. Because it is not divided, it is aviveka rupa. Vivek, or the knowledge of the external things, come when the mind is fragmented. It takes the shapes and properties of those external objects. Then only those cognition comes. Because it is not happening in sleep, it is aviveka rupa, but does not mean that there is no consciousness. Because of aviveka rupa, it is pragyana ghana. So if we look a little bit deeper into the cognition in sleep, what does scientific evidence tell us? That there is a thought, it is present and it is unchanging. Thought is not absent, perception is absent. Let us see what yoga says about nidra and how does it match with the scientific evidence. Yes, there is a void mental state, but it is not complete void. Abhava iti jagrad vishaya abhava natu atyanta abhava eva. That is being repeatedly told. So therefore, we cannot rule out that there is a complete void. We cannot rule out that there is nothing in sleep. There is a special kind of mental modification. Vyasa calls it as pratyaya vishesha nidra. It's a special modification. It's a different vritti. That is why in yoga, nidra is given a special cognitive state which is different from the other states. So this is the yogic view that it actually reinforces what we are finding through evidences. So continuing the yogic view, we say that there is no external awareness. We agree there is no object modification of the mind, because awareness of things comes only when there is a modification of the mind. Because there is no modification, there is no awareness. Tada buddhir vishaya akara parinama abhavaha. Tada means during sleep. There is nothing. So that's why there is no external awareness. But that does not rule out that there is no awareness. There is only internal awareness. That is why a sleeping person is called antasanga, sushupta antasanga. So this experience of sleep is an experience of internal consciousness. And that special consciousness is happening due to a special mental modification, which is pratyaya vishesha. It is a different thing. How does yoga establish this thing? By memory. Because we have memory of sleep. If there is no pratyaya, if there is no vritti, there won't be any memory. So smriti is one of the vritti jnana which is associated with all forms of other forms of vritti jnana that is listed in Patanjali's fivefold cognition. Because smriti is also associated with nidra, so nidra definitely must be a mental modification, a pratyaya, a particular vritti, which is of course different than others. That is why it is given a special status. Now, with that special vritti, what do we gain? What do we get out of that? What is our experience from that? Yes, of course, there is no memory during sleep. That is why we cannot perceive objects. And because we cannot perceive, all that fragmented consciousness becomes one, as if a mass. So it becomes eki bhuta ghana pragya because of the cessation of the memory and other things. But then we have awareness when we come out of it. That means definitely there was a particular modification. So here is the logic. Jnanam cha jnana rahitam na shakyam. How can we have knowledge without an object of knowledge? So when we are coming out of sleep, we are recalling experience. That means we have some knowledge. So there must be some object during that. But that object is not external. Definitely it is internal, because our senses are all shut down. So there is no external object for us. But still there is a jnanam. So definitely there must be a jnana. That means there is an object of knowledge. And what is that object? Yoga says mind itself is the object of knowledge. And that is why sleep is internal awareness. Sleep is internal awareness. So in this picture, we see there is no external object. So the mind is flowing around itself. The senses, eyes are shut down. Mind is flowing around itself. So it has become the object itself. And also the knowledge is happening in the mind. So this is a very special state. And because of this, we have various sleep experiences. Sometimes we say we are happy, we are unhappy. Sometimes we are not at all aware whether we slept well or not, right? So how we relate this? How can we explain this? Yoga says there's definitely a role of gunas. When sleep is predominantly tamas, a state of preponderance of tamas, but when sattva also accompanies the tamas, then that is called the sattviki nidra. And in that case, we feel happiness. We feel very pleasant. Prasannam me manaha, we say. When rajas accompanies tamas, that is called rajasya nidra. We say we slept unhappily. When it is overflowing tamas, that means there is no scope of rajas and tamas to come in the picture, we say we are completely unaware of what happened during sleep. And we feel lethargy, we feel a sort of laziness. We don't feel very comfortable. We come up and say, Klantam me chittam. So we are not very, it's not a good experience as if. So this is the tamasya nidra. So his yoga also maps the role of gunas to the experience in sleep, because all the three states, Jagrat, Swapna, Sushupti, they are all under the kingdom of the three gunas. So we are not free from the gunas during sleep. So definitely they will have a role to play in our sleep experience. And this is how the mapping of the sleep experience with the role of gunas. This is also a new thing, that interesting thing that the yoga brings to the table. Now, I found some very interesting evidences from some neuroscientific research. So we have seen that yoga view is that consciousness is there in sleep. Cognition is internal, awareness is internal. There is no object modification of the mind. Therefore, we do not know what is happening to the external world and all that. But during sleep is something happening which helps our cognition or awareness in the other states when we are connected to the external world? The answer is yes. So there were studies on sleep deprivation and the effect of sleep deprivation on cognition and how sleep helps memory consolidation. So it has been found then that the very, very fundamental components of consciousness, which is attention, working memory, and cognitive throughput and all those things, they are reduced progressively over days of sleep deprivation. So sleep has a very important role in the ability to increase cognition in other states, especially waking state. And it also helps memory consolidation. Whatever we acquire in the waking state, to consolidate that memory, sleep is very, very important. It has been found that cortical oscillations, thalamocortical spindle, and hippocampal ripples, different kinds of brain waves, they form a basis of memory consolidation during sleep. So all that is in non-declarative comes to declarative memory, and whatever is in working memory, it is consolidated. These kind of evidence has been found. So sleep state, although it appears to be completely unconscious and without any awareness, it is very, very important thing. Something very important is going on in inside, for which we have a better performance in the waking state. So sleep is very important in the ability to enhance cognition in other states. Finally, I come to the point of sleep and samadhi, which are the two extremes of the thread. On one hand, sleep is, according to Swami Vivekananda, it is a state below the ordinary consciousness. It's a subconscious state, and samadhi is a superconscious state. And what does yoga talk about it? Yoga says that sleep is a concentrated state of mind. It is a ekagra. Chitta bhumi is in the ekagra state. But that is not same. Although it looks like we have attained a very calm state and stable state, it is not the same as samadhi, because samadhi is actually a very, very higher state than ordinary concentration. Ekagra is not the final state where we can go to the samadhi state. It is a state higher than niruddham, which is a arrested state of mind. It's a higher than ekagra state. So although they look similar, sleep is actually on one end and samadhi is on the other end of the continuum. And in terms of gunas, sleep is full of tamas. Although they look similar, ekagra tulya api tamasattvena nidra is not actually a samadhi state. Whereas samadhi is a preponderance of pure sattva. There is overflowing sattva and pure sattva. So it is one extreme, although they look similar, tulya, but then they are actually extremes. So can we? So that is why nidra is also something that has to be conquered according to yoga. Sa api nirodhabhya, that Vyasa says, that this thing has to be conquered in order to go to samadhi state. Because according to yoga, according to Patanjali, yoga is samadhi. The goal is samadhi, and nidra, although looks similar to samadhi in certain respect, it is not. There is a lot of differences, and therefore this has to be conquered. So when we have this usual experience, when we try to concentrate or meditate, we usually fall asleep. So that is sometimes we mistakenly think that perhaps we have done some meditation, but then the yoga clearly says that this is a tamas state. It is not, although it is ekagra, it is tamas state, so therefore it cannot be a samadhi state. So, but then how can we leverage this thing for a higher state? Because yoga says that sattva can accompany tamas in sleep, and that is why a person can recall that I slept well. Sukhamaham aswapsam prasannam me manaha. Because sattva, because all the three states are under the three gunas. So in sleep, three gunas are also active, and when sattva is active along with tamas, then we can experience a good sleep. So if sattva accompanies tamas, and according to Gita, we know that sattva leads to knowledge. Sattvat sanjayate jnanam. So logically, if we think, is knowledge also not possible? Well, Patanjali says that meditating on the knowledge of sleep is a particular kind of special kind of yogic practice, which is called Eka Tattva Abhyasa. Eka Tattva Abhyasa is a very, very important practice, yogic practice that leads to samadhi. And one of the ways to do that is the meditating on the knowledge of sleep. That is a very, very crucial, is one of the alternate ways that Patanjali mentions. Swapna Nidra Jnana Alambanam Va. It's one of the alternates, one of the ways. So sleep is not to be completely discarded in that sense, that it is something which can be converted to a spiritual practice, a yogic practice to attain higher state of mind. So, and what does that do? If we do that, then it removes all the obstacles, the antaraya, the obstacles to yoga. There, Patanjali lists so many obstacles to yoga. So by doing this, various obstacles can be removed. And particularly, Patanjali talks about Ishvara Pranidhana as one of the fastest path. Asannatamaha. Asannatama, that is the Vyasa comments on it. Ishvara Pranidhana, that is surrendered to God. Ishvara has a definition according to yoga, which is a little bit different than other schools of thought, but then it is marked as one of the fastest path to asampragnata state, which is the highest state. And it is, Vyasa says, it is the asannatamaha. And this particular practice of swapna, nidra, jnana, alammanam, that will remove the obstacles to that path. So sleep has a very, very important role. Not only as we have seen in consolidating memory, making our understanding better, a lot of cognitive functions get better in waking state if we have a good sleep. So not only that, not only the components of normal life, but also component of spiritual life is enhanced by sleep. So sleep and samadhi, although they are two extremes of the continuum, one has to be conquered to attain the other, the higher state. There is something we can leverage from sleep state and convert it to a yogic practice, and therefore we can try to move up, elevate our mental state to the highest, which is the asampragnata samadhi according to yoga. So this was all that I wanted to share with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can you stop sharing? Thank you, Ajat Chaitanya, for a wonderful exposition on what are the concepts of yoga in the classical yoga literature, that is Patanjali Yoga Sutra, and how actually he conceives the idea of sleep and cognition, probably which is getting some parallels of the prevalent, the sleep science today. However, the most important thing that it has been elaborated in the Patanjali Yoga Sutra is that how, even though sleep is predominantly tamasic in nature, but how the overlapping with tamas with sattva can bring about a good quality of sleep, and overlapping with tamas with rajas can bring about a bad quality of sleep. So for which we have to really understand correctly what is this sattva, rajas and tamas. So though there are many works that are going on, but definitely I think people will be interested to hear from you if you want a good quality of sleep according to from yoga perspective. So what all could be the practices, right, where the sattva can be predominant on tamas during sleep rather than rajas? Probably this answer we can discuss it after all the speakers. So now I would like to invite the next speaker of the session, Dr. Balaganapati. He is a professor of philosophy in the University of Delhi, and his research interests are in Indian philosophy and philosophical practices. And he has been published many articles and books, out of which History of Indian Philosophy, Analysis of Contemporary Understanding of the Classical through Colonial is been very much cited. And he has been the project fellow for the Great Transition in India, a Korean perspective on Indian studies, and he's working on a project entitled Yoga Consciousness in Mahabharata, the ethical value for societal and political well-being. And he's also serving as a regional coordinator of Council for Research in Values and Philosophy from Washington, D.C., and also a chief advisor to the Center for Ethics Values for the Ramanujam College and the University of Delhi. And he's also being a special invited editor for the prestigious journals like Philosophical Practice, Journal of Human Values, International Journal of Applied Ethics, and also Berlin Journal of Philosophy, So it's a very great honor, Dr. Balaganapati, that you have accepted our invitation, and we would like to hear from you about your perspective on sleep from Vedantic point of view.
Yeah, thank you so much. I hope I'm audible, right?
Yeah.
Do I have to increase the volume? I think this is fine. Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Ravindra, for that kind introduction. And thank you so much for the invitation as well, because of which we had the opportunity. I had the opportunity of listening to many wonderful lectures last 2 days. So my co-panelists, Dr. Ravindran, and my co-panelist, Dr. Ajata Chaitanya. In fact, after he spoke, I don't know what remains for me to speak, because while relating the yogic nidra, yogic conceptions of sleep with Advaita Vedanta, he has almost exhausted half of what I'm supposed to speak. So that is all. And in a way, I take it in a different way. Basically, he has paved a wonderful platform for me. He prepared a wonderful platform for me so that I can go further on my talk. And Dr. Martin Dressler, a very interesting scholar with good projects, contemporary relevance with regard to consciousness and sleep consciousness studies, and distinguished participants and friends who have joined us today. The theme that I have chosen is looking at the phenomenology of subjective experience of sleep, insights from Shankara's commentary on Mandukya Upanishad. So basically, I am limiting myself. I should say something about what I'm actually trying to do. I'm trying to limit myself to Mandukya Upanishad and its commentary by Shankara. In fact, it would be surprising that so many thousands of years back, Mandukya Upanishad specifically talks about sleep and the distinction between sleep, dream sleep, and deep sleep. Right? It's not a new thing. It was, at least as per the accepted historical timeline, it's definitely more than 2,000 or 3,000 years back that people spoke about in India, classical India, about the distinction between sleep, dream sleep, and deep sleep. So that's something that we have to wonder about when it comes to the thought of these people. And Shankara, if we go by the accepted timeline, during 6th century BC, 6th century AD, he could talk about the interpretation of this Mandukya Karika, Mandukya Upanishad and Mandukya Karika by Gaudapada, and try to explain these concepts further so that we can understand them in a better way, to relate it to his own philosophical, metaphysical position of Advaita Vedanta. So that's what I would be looking at. And along with that, I will also try to explain how consciousness is fundamental in Advaita Vedanta, because if we are talking about sleep, dream sleep, and deep sleep, obviously we have to talk about consciousness. Where is the consciousness? So, and also it is the fundamental concept of Advaita Vedanta, whole of Advaita Vedanta itself. So that is how I would be talking about that as well. And then in the process of this discussion, I am intentionally trying to refrain myself from any Western comparison. I don't want to enter into that domain as of now, because I want to limit myself to Advaita Vedanta and also to the text. That is the loyalty that I want to show in this lecture. And so this is what I have in my mind. So let me begin. Friends, I had this wonderful opportunity of listening to Alan Wallace from Santa Barbara Institute of Consciousness Studies 2 days back. He spoke on this very platform. While speaking on modern science, how modern science meets classical Indian views of consciousness, he made very startling remarks, very interesting remarks with regard to the development of modern science and what has hampered the development of modern science, especially mental sciences, in reaching or in making revolutions in their study. He talks about William James, and he says it's the conception of William James with regard to the mental sciences that probably has hampered, delayed the revolution in mental sciences. In the process, he also talks about this hard problem that we talk about in consciousness studies, and how does consciousness come and what gives rise to consciousness, and what is the interface between consciousness and the other, whatever that you're calling it as an object or whatever it may be. So what is the interface between these two, which are still unsettled things in the Western scientific world. So he addresses them, and he says, interestingly, whether we accept or not, he brings it to Indian context and tries to show that though there are no scientific definition of accepted definition of consciousness that is available in the West, especially from the scientific perspective, and also though there is no objective means of detecting consciousness or any mental phenomena, or though there is a lot of ignorance with regard to neural correlates of consciousness, and also ignorance of how the brain generates or even influences mental phenomena. These aspects were addressed in Buddhism, especially in its what is it called, meditation states that were discussed in Buddhism. So he interestingly takes it to Buddhism and tries to explain it, saying that these issues that are troubling the modern science now were addressed during the classical Indian tradition. Whether they were addressed satisfactorily, or whether there were any conclusions that they have come up with which we have to accept, that is all matter of debate. But the point that we have to acknowledge is that such issues were raised and addressed properly, and a perspective of this philosophical school from India, classical philosophical school from India, has come out. Okay, but here, interestingly, Alan Wallace takes only Buddhism into consideration, but I feel in this particular regard, Advaita Vedanta is more helpful than Buddhism. So that's where I begin. Before I get into this conception of sleep, deep sleep and dream sleep of Advaita Vedanta, there are certain things that we have to first understand so that we will know why Advaita Vedanta or Shankara is talking that way. Okay, because what are his metaphysical commitments ought to be known to us, because it's a philosophical system. So each one of these philosophers that we have in India, they have metaphysical commitments which prompted them to have a kind of epistemological standpoint, and also the remaining explanation follows because of this metaphysical commitments. So metaphysical commitments are very important, which are to be understood so that we will know why Shankara is saying so and so. Okay, so that's where, in fact, Venerable Ajit Chaitanya has wonderfully presented this Yoga Nidra and how yoga has looked at sleep consciousness and deep sleep, etc. But Advaita Vedanta differs from that as well. That was also explained very well by Venerable Ajit Chaitanya. So basically, what are the metaphysical commitments that Advaita Vedanta has posited? Number one, the first important thing, the philosophically very controversial and debated aspect. Okay, the first one is existence depends on knowledge. Advaita Vedanta believes that existence basically depends on knowledge. Okay, it is not that whatever usually our common sense perspective would tell us that if there is an object that exists, then that becomes eligible for our knowledge. But Advaita Vedanta takes a completely reversal view of that, and it says whatever an object to a thing to exist, it has to be an object of knowledge. Okay, so it may not be an object of knowledge to me alone, but it could be an object of knowledge to someone. Okay, and also I can have an object of I can have that thing as an object of knowledge indirectly as well. But existence basically depends on knowledge is the fundamental presupposition with which Shankara moves forward. Okay, and this is very interesting kind of one, because if we say X exists, which means it must be known to somebody. Can we say that X exists, but it is not known to somebody? No. So in that case, X, even if it exists, it is as good as it is not known to us. Okay. So this is the kind of standpoint to which Advaita Vedanta gets committed to. So if something exists in knowledge or in experience, that exists only such kind of thing can be understood to be existing, because it has to exist in the as a part of the knowledge. Okay, so the knower and the knowledge distinction becomes very important. Okay, more than the actual existence of a thing itself. Okay, so the epistemology is given more predominance here. That's what I want you to recognize. No, it has to be an object of knowledge to exist, and it is not. If it is not yours, it could be somebody else as well. So if this is the case, the second important aspect, the commitment that Advaita Vedanta makes is something like this. If there are two things, then they can be said to be existent independently and separately. Okay. If there are two things that exist, they have to exist independently and separately. Only then we understand them to be independent ones. Okay. So, for example, we have a pen and a paper. Okay. So, for example, we understand these two to be existent only if we understand pen independently and separately, and paper independently and separately, and paper and pen together as well and separately as well. This seems to be very commonsensical kind of thing. But from this, what the draws is very important. What Advaita Vedanta draws is very important. What Advaita Vedanta tries to draw from this is that when we talk about consciousness of an object, okay, so there is a consciousness of pen, and can a pen, okay, consciousness and pen, object, and can, when we say consciousness of an object, can we say that object exists independent of the consciousness? And by going by Advaita Vedanta, we have to say that no, it cannot exist independent of the consciousness. Okay, consciousness exists. Okay, my eye, my ear, my objects that I see around me, all of them exist as I am aware of them, as a part of my conscious perception, conscious cognition. So if something doesn't exist, something is not independent of, something is not independent and separate, then that such kind of thing cannot be said to be existent. When we say experience, consciousness is already there, and whatever can be experienced can only be experienced in consciousness. That is the limitation that we have, that Advaita Vedanta brings in. It says the objects that we have around the world, okay, do not exist apart from knowledge. So unless I know them, unless they are part of the knowledge of somebody, they don't exist. Okay, that is how the world of objects do not exist apart from knowledge, and knowledge cannot or does not exist apart from the knower. So because if we are talking about knowledge, knower is very important. Knower has to be there. So knowledge cannot exist apart from the knower, and knower does not exist apart from consciousness. Okay, and that is how knower and knowledge are part of consciousness itself. So that is how things, where do things exist? Things exist in consciousness according to Advaita Vedanta. Okay, so that is how consciousness is very fundamental to knower, knowledge, and known, Triputi that we talk about, subject, object, or subject and object are dependent on consciousness. Now, from this perspective, from this standpoint, first it tries to establish that existence is dependent on knowledge. And then since the world of objects do not exist independently and separately of the conscious knowledge, they are part of consciousness. And at the third level, it brings another important one, the concept of mithya. Unfortunately, concept of mithya is grossly misunderstood by the people, thinking that it is non-existence or it false existence kind of one. In fact, mithya is explained as something that depends on something else for its existence. If there is something, there is an object, there is a thing, particular thing, which cannot exist independently and separately, then such kind of a thing is called mithya. Okay, so that is how when we talk about Advaita Vedanta's statement, Brahma Satyam, Jagan Mithya, Jivo Brahmaiva Para. Basically, mithya here means something that cannot exist independently and separately. It has to exist as a part of something else. Okay, so it is only a modification of it. For example, the examples that they give, or something like looking at hot potato. So where is this hotness? It doesn't lie with the potato in the sense that it is not intrinsic to potato. It is hot now, and previously it may not be hot, and after some time it may not be hot as well. So what is this hotness of potato? It is only an acquired property. So that is how it is called mithya to them, by them. And similarly, if you take fire and hotness, it is intrinsic to fire. Hotness is intrinsic to fire. So that is how the distinction is drawn between mithya, which is an acquired property that disappears after some time, and something that eternally exists underlyingly. Okay, so this is how they make a distinction between mithya, the real, and the mithya. So this is the background with which they try to explain, okay, the ultimate reality. And this explanation of ultimate reality is something that is very interesting and important for us to look at, in which this distinction of dream sleep and deep sleep become a part. And here, yeah, so I told you their ontological commitment is that everything that exists in the world is consciousness, pure consciousness. Okay, it is not object of consciousness, or it doesn't accept the statement that unless there is an object of consciousness, consciousness cannot be there. So it doesn't go by such kind of an argument. It says there is pure consciousness, which is ultimate reality, in which everything that exists in the world is a part, or in which everything that exists is included. Okay, so that's how it goes. And the method is very important here. It says, see, if the ultimate reality is pure consciousness, and how do I know that? How do I look at that? Okay, should I, by going by some certain practices, should I say that, yeah, let me select a particular plan of action and execute it on few people, and then make them reach a particular stage, and then make them realize what it is, and then inform us? No. Okay, so what kind of methodologies that we should follow in order to understand that everything is consciousness, including the world that we see around us? Okay, so the methodology that they take up, okay, these methodologies, etc., are very useful even with regard to the sleep studies, etc., as well. That's why I was going back to these methodologies and talking about them. So it says to know the reality, the methodology that is required is vichara, self-inquiry, inquiring. And this inquiry is into self-inquiry. Okay, so if you want to know the ultimate reality to be the consciousness, then you don't have to go anywhere. Okay, it's not completely metaphysical kind of one in that sense. In order to realize that, what you have to do is you have to begin with your own self-inquiry. And what is this self-inquiry? Why did he begin with self-inquiry? Because he understands. No, this is where I argue strongly that Shankara's conception is very pragmatic and rational and empirical as well. So you cannot say his conception is not empirical, because it is very much empirical. Because he begins with the individual, every individual, you and me, anybody we can take anybody to be the example of this. And he says, you inquire into yourself. Okay, so how should I do that? Let us take something that is common to everybody who has lived, who is living, and who will be living. Okay, so what is common to everyone, common experience of everyone? What is the common experience of everyone? Let us take that into consideration and develop proceed with the inquiry as to whether really the consciousness is the one that exists. Okay, so he says, let us have a look at each one of us and try to understand our experiences. These experiences are not generalized ones that he is referring to. He is universalizing them. See, when we say generalization, we take some examples and then we experiment on them, and on the basis of a few evidences, we generalize. But when we are talking about universal, we are trying to talk about the past, present, and the future as well. So he is trying to take his system to such a level that it is universally acceptable. That is how he says every individual will have his own experiences, and let us start with those experiences. And he says every individual will have at least 4 states of experiences. And what are these 3 states of experiences? And what are these 3 states of experiences? Waking state, nobody can deny it, whether you are a scientist or a religious person or somebody, you cannot deny that you are in a waking state. And you also dream, you cannot deny that. So this is a universally experienced thing. And also all of us experience deep sleep as well. So he says, let me begin with these 3, which are experienced by everyone. And then he proceeds with his inquiry called Vichara, self-inquiry called Vichara, and investigate into the experience of our own selves. So that's how he says, you don't have to talk about the other. You start talking about your own self and your own experiences, then you would automatically reach something called the universal consciousness, or consciousness which pervades all of us. So that's how he begins with everyday lived experiences, and then every individual experiences are taken into consideration. And this is where he leads us to the concept of pure consciousness. So he makes this distinction between various states of experiences: waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. Before I say something on that, I'm tempted to begin the discussion with the very definition of pure consciousness that is provided by provided in Mandukya Upanishad. Just give me 1 minute. The reflection is on my screen.
10 minutes. Dr. Bala, you have another 10 minutes.
Yeah, sure. I will not take much time. The definition of pure consciousness that is provided, which is considered to be the Turiya, the fourth state according to Mandukya Upanishad, is Nanta Prajnam, na Bahiprajnam, no Bhayataha Prajna, na Prajnanaghanam, na Prajnam, na Aprajnam, Adrustam, Avyavaharam, Agrahyam, Alakshanam, Achintyam, Avyapadesyam, Ekatma Pratyesaram, Prapanchopsamam, Santam, Sivam, Advaitam, Chaturdham Manyante, Sa Atma Si Vigneyaha. So what it tries to tell us is that this pure consciousness state that we are talking about, it is not merely internal, subject to consciousness, okay, the consciousness of the internal world alone. And it is not merely the consciousness of the external world alone. It is neither both of them or beyond them as well. And it is not simple consciousness, or it is not insentience as well. So what the methodology that he follows to explain this is, in Indian tradition, we have something called Anvaya, Vyatireka, and Swarupa. So these are the three ways through which you try to explain something that you want to do. So first, it says, it follows the method of Vyatireka. So it says what it is not. And then it tries to explain Anvaya, what it is somehow related to be. And then actually what it is explained here. It is unseen, and it is not related to anything, incomprehensible, uninferable, unthinkable, indescribable, essentially of the nature of consciousness, constituting self alone, negation of all phenomena, the peaceful, all bliss and non-dual. That is what is known as pure consciousness according to Mandukya Upanishads. So what it tries to basically explain is that none of these attributes that we have, that we use in the waking state, are applicable to that. Similarly, none of the things that we attribute during the sleeping state are attributable to that. And the distinction, a very interesting distinction that we bring in all these three states that I mentioned, waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, the distinction of knower and the known, the object that is known and the knower, all of them get collapsed in this pure conscious state. And this pure conscious state is at the background of all these three states that are explained. And that is how it is very important that unless we know this consciousness to be at the background, we will not be able to understand how waking state is explained, and how sleeping state is, dreaming state is explained, and how deep sleep is explained. So basically, there is a distinction of knower, known, and the state in which the individual, in which the person is maintained in this Upanishad, where the first one that we are referring to, the state of waking state, the known is the external world. And how is this external world known? Who knows this? The waker. Vishwa is known. Waker is the one who is knowing this external world. Through what? Through his mind and his sense organs. Okay. So what participates? What is it that makes the external world to be known by the knower in the waking state is mind along with the external organs. And that is how you have these experiences. So you have both internal and external experiences simultaneously happening in the waking state. And when it comes to the dream state, he says in the Swapna, dream state, the world is, the object known is the dream world. And the knower here is called a dreamer or Tejasa. Okay. But here, the what do you call, sense organs stop working, and instead mind starts working on the basis of the impressions and the memory that was acquired during the waking state, and it creates its own world. So here, the object as well as the projector of that object, both of them are mind itself. So it is the mind which projects it like a movie and produces it. And that is where, though the external sense organs are not there, the mind plays a crucial role in building this dream world. And then he proceeds to the third level, which is deep sleep, Sushupti, where the object is only consciousness, because the known is only consciousness there. Okay. And as it was explained by Ajita Chaitanya ji, the knower and known distinction collapses, but the experience remains in Sushupti. And the sleeper, after the deep sleep, when you talk to them, when you ask them, how did you sleep well, the statements that Ajita Chaitanya ji has mentioned, like Sukham aham avapsam, okay, asvapsam, sorry, Sukham aham asvapsam. Okay, he then says, yeah, I had a good sleep, but basically there was only an experience and there was no object of experience that was existent there. And that is how he could infer the state and make a statement about the deep sleep. So this kind of distinction is maintained basically to explain that beyond these three distinctions, there is a sheet of consciousness, turiya, which is working, which is making them possible. And these are the, as I said, mithyas. Okay, so basically the point that Shankara tries to arrive at is that equally both waking state and dreaming state are mithya, because consciousness is the only thing that is pure and which is of the quality of Satchidananda and which is real in the sense of without any modifications. And these three states that are spoken of in terms of waking, dreaming, and deep sleep are only modifications of that. And that is how they are not real, but mithya. As I explained you, mithya is something that that cannot exist independently and separately of something else. So in that particular sense, Advaita Vedanta explains that equally, I'm stressing this point, equally, both waking state as well as the dream and deep sleep state are mithya. Okay, so that's how Advaita Vedanta, from the philosophical standpoint, tries to explain this distinction. And I think I would stop it here, so that if there is a possibility of discussion, I can intervene and come in. Thank you so much. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you, Dr. Bala, for your exposition of understanding of the deeper aspects of sleep, especially from Mandukya Upanishad, where the discussions in Mandukya was on the premise that the consciousness is the primary thing. But however, from yoga perspective, it is more of the perception and the cognition. So that's why, to understand these aspects of Mandukya understanding of sleep related consciousness, of course, we need to understand the terminologies very, very clearly, right, before venturing into the empirical other evidences. So now we'll move on to the next speaker is Dr. Martin Dressler. Thank you, Dr. Martin, that you have joined us and you have honored our invitation. Dr. Martin is an associate professor of cognitive neuroscience at Radboud University Medical Center. He leads the Donders Sleep and Memory Laboratory. He is a trained biopsychologist. He's a philosopher and also a mathematician at Ruhr University. And he received his PhD from Philipps University of Marburg with experience as a postdoctoral research at Max Planck Institute, Oxford, and Stanford University. So he has many contribution in understanding the cognitive neuroscience of sleep and including the brain basis of conscious experience during sleep. So Dr. Martin, it's over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the kind introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for the really great talks of the two previous speakers. I enjoyed them very much, and I would like to add a couple of things from basic and more cognitive neuroscience. Let me share my screen, so that should work. So can you see my slides clearly, or no, wait?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think I'll, I'm sorry. So that should work better. So yeah, I would like to give a brief introduction and overview of the neuroscience of sleep and dreaming in particular. So all kinds of conscious experiences that we have during sleep. And I think much of that nicely connects to the previous two talks, just from a slightly different perspective, which maybe makes this quite a nice addition, and later on will lead to some discussions maybe. To bring everyone on the same page, in particular, those of you who have no experience in neuroscience or sleep research, maybe a very brief introduction on, into what we are speaking of if we speak about these different sleep stages and how we actually do measure them. And the gold standard in sleep research is so-called polysomnography. So we are measuring several things in sleep. And the two main measurements, there are many more possible, but these are the two core measurements that any polysomnography would need to have, is the electroencephalogram, the EEG, the electrooculogram, the EOG, measuring the eye movements during wakefulness or sleep, and then the electromyogram or EMG that measures muscle activity. And we typically measure this here at the chin, since we have some electrodes anyways at the head region. And that makes it easiest to measure it there. But in principle, we could measure that anywhere on the body at any muscle. Using these three measurements, we can then, depending on the patterns we record, we can then define different sleep stages. So the sort of transitional state of sleep, non-REM sleep 1 or N1, is the first state where we become drowsy and slowly transition into sleep. Often if like people from the outside look already as if they were sleeping, but if we wake them up, they typically report that they were still aware of their environment. So it's really a sort of an in-between state. And here we see in green these slow rolling eye movements that already like indicate that people are a bit drowsy and not paying that much attention anymore. The EEG looks still very similar to wakefulness, however, a bit slower. So it's still these small amplitude, very fast EEG, but we see already some theta waves that were already mentioned. And the muscle tone is still quite high. If we then transition further into sleep, the first sort of real sleep stage is N2 or non-REM sleep 2. Where we do not see any more of these slow rolling eye movements. The EEG becomes even slower. And then we see some of these like micro events here, which are called sleep spindles or K complexes, depending on the frequency and size. And if we see those, then we know for sure these subjects are finally asleep. And we still see a quite high muscle tone, however, a bit lower already compared to wakefulness or sleep stage 1. Then we go into actual deep sleep, also called slow wave sleep or N3. And that is characterized by these very large amplitude, very slow waves that were also mentioned already. Like at a frequency of like lower than 4 hertz and really large amplitudes here. What we are observing here are large populations of neurons that fire together in synchrony. So if large neuron populations fire together in a very similar pattern from the outside, from the scalp, we then see these very large amplitude, very low, very slow waves. In comparison, if the neurons fire together chaotically without much synchrony, then we see the typical wave patterns. Or we do see, as the next sleep stage that was also mentioned in quite some detail, which is REM sleep, where the EEG looks very similar to wakefulness actually, or to sleep stage 1. So the brain is very active and there's a very like chaotic and non-synchronous pattern of neuron firings. However, in addition, we see these somewhat jerky eye movements called rapid eye movements. That's where the name comes from. Like considerably different from those eye movements we see during the transition state of sleep and more similar actually to eye movements we would see during wakefulness. But what differentiates REM sleep strikingly from wakefulness is here this complete loss in muscle tone. Here at the bottom, you see that the muscle tone is completely absent, and that stems from a really like active paralysis of the whole body. So all of our bodily muscles are completely paralyzed during REM sleep. And these sleep stages, also that was shown already, do not occur randomly across the night, but in a very regular fashion. We have like most of our like deep sleep or slow wave sleep here in the first half of the night, and most of our REM sleep in the second half of the night. And we typically have like 4 or 5 of these cycles throughout the night. So the question now is, how does dreaming or consciousness come into play here? Like, are these different sleep stages related to different kind of sleep experiences or different conscious state during sleep? And REM sleep was discovered about 70 years ago or so. And quite quickly, the researchers who discovered REM sleep thought that it might be the biological basis of dreaming. And they like just woke up their subjects from different sleep stages, either from REM sleep here or from non-REM sleep. And it turned out that if they woke up people from REM sleep, then most of them reported a dream and very few did not report a dream. And for non-REM sleep, we have the opposite, that very few people reported a dream and most of them did not report a dream. And so for many years from then on, it was sort of the common dogma or knowledge in the field that REM sleep is sort of the basis of dreaming. And there were also animal studies that pointed in similar directions. Already in the 1950s, 1960s, studies in France by Michel Jouvet, who used the cat as a model organism and discovered the brainstem region that is responsible for this muscle atonia, for this paralysis. And in his cats, he destroyed this region and by that made sure that the muscle paralysis does not occur. So that, that during sleep still, the motor, also during REM sleep, the motor system could be actively executed by bodily muscles. And this is one example of these studies. So this is a cat sleeping. Here you see the EEG. And now the cat falls into REM sleep. So the cat is still asleep and however moves and appears to behave and appears to look for something or so. And I think it's like just to briefly show it again, since it's so impressive. So the cat here really is asleep and is in REM sleep. And I think it's very difficult to not interpret this as the cat dreaming and dreaming, say, of mice that it would chase. This was discovered in the 1950s, 1960s, in the 1980s. Something similar was discovered also in humans called REM sleep behavior disorder, where these brain stem regions obviously are not destroyed on purpose, but naturally through neurodegenerative processes when people become older, and in particular in patients with Alzheimer's. This is a very early symptom of Parkinson's disease, very early symptom of Parkinson's disease, where these brainstem regions degenerate and get destroyed. And then also some like human patients start to act out their dreams during REM sleep. This is different from sleepwalking, which typically happens during slow wave sleep, or at least during non-REM sleep. But here, if these brain regions like are destroyed and therefore the muscle atonia does not work, then either animals or humans like tend to act out their dreams. And also neuroimaging studies from the 1990s in particular. So this is a review of several of these neuroimaging studies pointed into a similar direction. So what you see here, so here you see the front of the brain and here the back of the brain, here back and front. Everything that is colored here in bluish are deactivations during REM sleep. Everything here in yellow is activations during REM sleep. And what we see is that here in the motor system, in visual areas, also in like these medial temporal lobe regions, including the amygdala, there's a lot of like additional activity during REM sleep. And in contrast, in these prefrontal regions and frontal polar regions here at the very front, directly behind the forehead, and also in some parietal regions, there are deactivations. So the brain is very inactive in REM sleep compared to other sleep stages of wakefulness. And that fits quite well with what we experience during dreaming, namely that we are always active in dreaming. Typically, like the motor system is active, most of our dreams are visual, which nicely fits with these visual cortex activations here. Many of our dreams are very emotional, which fits nicely with the amygdala activations. And also the deactivations fit nicely, in particular here, these prefrontal deactivations that typically process higher cognition and in particular metacognitive processes. So if we think about ourselves, then these regions are also very active during wakefulness. And here in REM sleep, they are deactivated, and that fits nicely with the observation that, well, consciousness is very dull during sleep. And in particular, like these higher cognitive processes are impaired. So typically during a dream, we do not realize that we are in a dream, despite the dream maybe being very bizarre and surreal. And still we have a very restricted cognition there, or a very illogical cognition also. So that fits nicely together. The problem, however, is that already in the 1960s, 1970s, there were some studies showing that also during non-REM sleep, you do get much more, not necessarily dream reports, but reports of mental activity or of cognitive activity from sleep, if you like ask slightly different questions. So in the 1950s, it was always asked, did you dream? And then from the 1960s, 1970s onwards, it was asked, was there anything going on in your mind? And suddenly people like started to tell, oh yes, there was a lot going on in my mind. They just didn't interpret this to be dreaming. And also that we had already in the previous talks that there is some like different quality to these mental activity during non-REM sleep. So it's not as colorful, it's not as story-like and not as rich as during REM sleep. It's more like repetitive abstract thought that we have during non-REM sleep. And this is a nice study from 20 years ago that just quantitatively like looked at mental activity during wakefulness, during sleep onset, and then during non-REM and REM sleep. And you see that that for these more abstract thoughts, we have most of that during wakefulness, of course, still a lot during non-REM sleep and very little during REM sleep. And for like hallucinations and these really rich story-like prototypical dream content, we have most of that during REM sleep. However, just from the pure dream report itself, it's very difficult to differentiate between REM sleep and non-REM sleep. So that suggests that REM sleep is not the sole basis of dreaming or of mental activity during sleep, but there might be some qualitative differences during different sleep stages, but they might not be as strict as previously thought. There's more recent research that also goes into a similar direction here from Francesca Ciclari from a couple of years ago. They used high density EEG, so a lot of electrodes to really look deep into the brain, what happens during dreaming. And they woke up people several times during the night and asked for dream reports. And what they did here is that they did not just ask, did you dream or not, or was there something going on in your mind? But they asked for three different options. First, they asked, like, did you dream or was there something going on in your mind? And can you remember it? The second option was there something going on in your mind, but you cannot remember it? So sometimes that happens, that you have the feeling, yeah, there was some mental content, but I have no idea what it was. I completely forgot it or just didn't encode it or something like that. And the third option was, no, there was nothing whatsoever. I'm sure there was just nothing. And now the interesting result from this study was that these two conditions where people had the feeling that they dreamt something, no matter if they remembered it or not, were very similar, and they were drastically different from the condition where people were sure that there was nothing whatsoever going on in their mind. And on the neural level and on the EEG level, that was in particular separated by different frequencies. So on the one hand, these very low frequencies here in the delta range below 4 Hertz. So these frequencies that are like stronger during deep sleep, the less of that subjects had, the more likely they were to experience a dream. So less of these deep sleep patterns in the EEG, more likely to report a dream, remembered or not. And that was interestingly the same for non-REM sleep and for REM sleep. So there was not too much of a difference here between these different sleep stages. The pattern was very similar. And the second finding was that for very high frequencies in the range of 20 to 50 Hertz, so that is considerably faster also than theta. So this is in the beta and gamma range. There it was a positive correlation. So the more of these frequency, also in these like posterior areas in the back of the brain, people had, the more likely they were to experience some dream content, again, remembered or not. And what was interesting is that these higher frequencies even could be used to sort of guess what the content of the dream was. So at least for a couple of seconds before awakening, the brain region that exhibited these high frequency patterns like predicted what was possibly the content of the dream. So in this case here, the fusiform phase area is a small region that is known to process phases. And if people in the seconds before awakening had like strong higher frequencies here in the area of the fusiform phase area, then they were very likely to report dreams about persons, about faces, and interacting with dream characters. And the same is true also for spatial settings, so speech also there in the regions where you would expect it. If there were more of these higher frequencies, then people like dreamt about either like talking with someone or about spatial settings or houses or buildings or something like that. So in a sense, you could read a bit of the content of the dream. If you now want to go like more deeply into the dream and get more complex and complicated dream content, and in particular dream content that is not just visible in the seconds before awakening, since you see here like 6 or 8 seconds back that there isn't any significant association anymore, then there is one possibility, and that is the phenomenon of lucid dreaming. So lucid dreaming is defined as a dream stage where during the dream we realize that we are dreaming. So if we are in our dream environment and we somehow realize something is strange here, and then at some point just think, well, this has to be a dream, and then are fully aware of the nature of the dream during the dream without waking up. And that often comes also with full access to our daytime memories, to our autobiographical memories. We realize in what state we are. We know that in reality we are just lying in a bed and sleeping, and this whole environment that we are currently experiencing is just a hallucination made by us, basically. Lucid dreaming is a rather rare state. About 50%, depending on the survey, about 50% or so of the population ever had a lucid dream. But it is something that can be learned and can be trained. And it is very helpful for dream research and for neuroscience of dreaming. And the reason for that is, on the one hand, that we can ask people who are able to dream lucidly to dream about specific things, so they can perform tasks in their dreams that we like arrange with them before going to sleep. So we have some control over the dream content, and we have have a possibility for live interaction with the dreamer while they are still asleep. And the gold standard here is so-called eye signaling, and you see here again the EEGs, very similar to wakefulness during REM sleep. The muscle tone here is completely flat, so this is certainly REM sleep. And now the EOG is not affected by this muscle atonia, so the eyes are really acting out what is happening in the dream. And if we ask lucid dreamers to look to the left, to the right, to the left, to the right in their dreams, this is something that we can clearly see here in the electroencephalogram, and afterwards can check the dream report and then really can compare this. And this typically fits perfectly that people said, yeah, and I did that many eye movements and waited for a while and that eye movements again. And so this is an objective sign that people are actually lucid, and it is a channel to communicate with a sleeping person. And this communication is even possible both directions. So this is a study that a German colleague a couple of years initiated, and he taught people to use Morse code and then used Morse code either with visual lights, some flashing lights, or with beeping tones to bring some information into the dream, in this case, simple math problems. And the task of the sleepers was to respond to these math problems with eye movements. So they should signal the number of eye movements that was the solution to this math problem, and that typically worked very well. And we replicated this together with several groups in the US, in France, in Germany, and here in the Netherlands. Besides these beeping tones and flashing lights, we could also use tactile stimuli. We could use spoken words, and besides the eye movements, also some slight muscle twitches in the face could be used as the outgoing channel. So with lucid dreamers, it is possible to really, like on a very rudimentary level, communicate during sleep. We can use that to make to set up studies and experiments during dreams. So in this case here, we ask people to do hand movements in an fMRI scanner. So here, what you see here is during wakefulness. Like in blue, if someone moves the right hand, then on the contralateral side, on the left side, the motor system gets active, and vice versa. With the left hand, you see the activation of the motor system on the right side. What you see here now on the right is the same task, however, during a dream. So someone is here sleeping in a scanner, is not moving at all because like the body is completely paralyzed. However, in their dream, they are moving the left or the right hand, and they indicate when they start and stop with these tasks with eye movements. And therefore, we can nicely track the motor activity. And again, we see the activity of the motor cortex on the contralateral side being active when doing hand movements. And in principle, this setup, of course, can be used for any other kind of dream content. And so it is possible to somehow have a look into the dream while it is ongoing by working with lucid dreamers. What is happening in a lucid dream and how can you make it happen? There are some indications since many years, since many decades, actually people try to like develop strategies to get lucid and to induce lucid dreaming. One strategy that is sometimes called the wake back to bed strategy is that you wake up in the early morning. As I showed in the beginning, this is the time where we have most of our REM sleep. So after 4 or 5 hours of sleep, you try to wake up, and then you stay awake for half an hour or something like that, and then you go back to bed. If you do that, so this is a study already from 25 years ago or so, like if you stay awake for just 10 minutes, you already slightly increase your chance to have a lucid dream. If you stay awake for half an hour or 1 hour, you massively increase your chance of having a lucid dream. What is happening here, we think, is that due to this period of wakefulness, half an hour, 1 hour, you activate your brain and you activate particularly your prefrontal cortex. And if you go back to bed, then you quite quickly enter a REM sleep period, since most of our REM sleep is happening in the early morning, and therefore an activated prefrontal cortex meets a REM sleep period, and that might then give rise to a lucid dream. There's sort of a natural experiment of this wake back to bed method, and that is the disease called narcolepsy. So it's a sleep disorder where the patients have a lot of fragmented sleep during the night and a lot of sleep attacks during the day. So there's a lot of like this change between wake and sleep, in particular between REM sleep and wakefulness. And indeed, we found that narcoleptic patients have a massively increased lucid dreaming frequency. And also in some of our lab experiments, we just like asked people in the morning if they had a lucid dream or how lucid their dreams were. And it turned out that the more of these wake REM sequences people had, so if they woke up just briefly and then quickly went back into REM sleep, that this predicted the lucidity in their dreams. So this sequence of being awake and then entering REM sleep appears to be very beneficial to lucid dreaming. We also tested the neurocorrelates of lucid dreaming. So what happens in the brain while people are lucid? What we found, so here is the back of the brain and here is the front of the brain. So what we found is like a pattern of activations in lucid REM sleep compared to non-lucid REM sleep. What is particularly interesting is here, again, the very frontal, prefrontal areas, the frontal polar areas directly behind the forehead, that are much more active during lucid dreaming and that are normally inactive during REM sleep, during normal REM sleep. And what's interesting is that these areas are those that, that during wakefulness are responsible for metacognitive processing. So if we think about our own state of mind, if we think about our own cognition, then these regions get active. In this study here shown on the bottom, this is an anatomical study. It showed that people who are particularly good about thinking their own cognition show more gray matter in these brain areas. And something similar we also shown a couple of years ago in lucid dreamers. So people who have a lot of lucid dreams compared to people without any lucid dreams or with very few lucid dreams also have more gray matter, more cortex in these very prefrontal frontal polar brain areas. And one additional study from colleagues from the US who looked at like people who have a lot of lucid dreams, again, compared them to non-lucid dreamers. And they took the very brain region here at the frontal polar cortex that was the strongest, showed the strongest difference between lucid and non-lucid dreaming, and compared the connectivity of the whole brain with this region that is sort of one of the lucidity regions. And it turned out that, again, like a network of brain areas that is active during lucid dreaming separates the frequent lucid dreamers from the non-frequent lucid dreamers. So there appears really to be a brain network that is associated with lucid dreaming, and you can test something like that even during daytime and even on the anatomical level. So how, like, since lucid dreaming is a rare phenomenon, how can we make it happen more often if we want to do research with it, if we want to study metacognition during sleep and higher cognitive processes during sleep? And there are a lot of strategies. One strategy is just to train your metacognition during daytime. So just to engage in these metacognitive like questioning, that every once in a while you think about your own state of mind, and in particular think like, am I awake or am I dreaming? And if that becomes a habit, then this habit might also get activated during your dreams, and during your dreams you start yourself asking if you're awake or dreaming. This sort of metacognitive training works particularly well if you do it in sleep-like, dream-like situations. Problem is, of course, that most of our situations during daytime are not very dream-like, so they are very boring, and therefore it's very difficult to train this. Therefore, a while ago, we did a study where we used virtual reality to just program very dream-like situations. So this is the university cafeteria, and our subjects had to like play a waiter or waitress and serve people food. And sometimes when they didn't pay attention, then the environment changed and became very dreamlike. And so this was sort of a training ground for this metacognitive training. And it turned out that at least for some of them, so this year is the condition for virtual reality. This is an active control condition where they also did training, but without the support of virtual reality, and a passive control where they didn't receive any training. And indeed, they became better over time. It was not the magic pill that everyone learned lucid dreaming, but at least quite a number of them. You know, on the bottom, you see like every rectangular here is one person and the development over time. And you see that about half of them over the course of 6 weeks of training profited quite considerably. Now, much more interesting, I think, when it comes to like traditional Asian culture is not virtual reality, but mindfulness training. And there are a couple of studies looking at that in how far like these metacognitive like training done during mindfulness training, if that is associated with lucid dreaming and might lead to more lucid dreams. And there was one study from a couple of years ago from Talas Dundries, who like looked in a large survey, people with and without mindfulness training experience, meditation experience. And it turns out that those people who had some meditation experience indeed like showed this association between trait mindfulness and lucid dreaming frequencies. So the more mindfulness they showed in a questionnaire, the more lucid dreams they had. If you look into more detail, you see that in particular, like if you differentiate within mindfulness, it's more like presence in the current situation that was responsible for this effect, and not so much acceptance. There is another study from just 2 years ago from Benjamin Baird, who like tested long-term meditators with several years of mindfulness training experience compared to meditation naive subjects. Also there was a nice difference between the two, that the long-term meditators had more lucid dreams than the meditation naive subjects, even though the difference was not that strong. However, there was only very weak correlation in this study with mindfulness traits. And what was even more disappointing was that at least an 8-week mindfulness training here did not lead to increased lucid dreaming. So it appears that just a bit of mindfulness training does not help to have more lucid dreams, but either it is really a trait effect, or it is really years of mindfulness training that you need here. Okay, with that, I'm done with my talk. Just to conclude with a couple of take-home messages, in particular, some still open questions, much more open questions actually than take-home messages. There is a difference between REM sleep and non-REM sleep dreaming. What is particularly interesting, at least in my view, is the topic of metacognition during sleep and dreaming, namely lucid dreaming, and in particular how that relates to metacognition and metacognitive capacity during daytime. Most of lucid dream research focuses on REM sleep. However, there are some studies showing that there might be also lucid dreaming during non-REM sleep, and that might be very interesting for the whole discussion. Since non-REM sleep states might be very interesting also from this cognitive perspective. There's the phenomenon of so-called white dreams. So this phenomenon that you have the feeling that you dreamt something, but you have no idea what it was, so that you either forgot it or failed to encode it, or there just was no content, there was just pure consciousness or something. And that is also the question: is there something that like conscious but dreamless sleep? And then I think that the most interesting for the discussion is how does that relate to Asian culture and Asian traditions, where there is a lot of experience and knowledge with these witnessing sleep, lucid dreamless sleep experiences, dream yoga as it's sometimes called. I'm not sure only in the West or if that's also the term used in Asia, but I think that is that there's a lot of potential here. Since much of the modern neuroscience of dreaming is just a rediscovery and spending some attention on things that have been thought about already hundreds and thousands of years ago. And I think there's a lot of untapped potential to really bring this together and then look into on the neural side of these experiences. With that, I'm closing. Thank you very much for your attention, and of course, thanks to my team who did all of these studies. Yeah, with that, I'm done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dressler, for taking us through the journey of lucid dreaming and how during lucid, and so you told that lucid dreaming can be trained, and what happens during lucid dreaming in the different areas of the brain. So now I think we'll open for the discussions. So I'll open with one question to our first speaker. As I mentioned that from the yoga perspective, you told to have a quality of sleep, tamas has to be added with sattva. So suppose if, is there a way in the yoga practices where I can increase the sattva on tamas during sleep? Or what are the conditions where sattva predominates during sleep along with tamas?
That's a very good question, Dr. Ravindra. In fact, the basis of this entire thing is the Ashtanga Yoga of Patanjali. And Ashtanga Yoga has 8 components. Out of that, the first 2 practices actually aim to increase sattva, and that is consciously in the waking state. That means there are 10 disciplines that a person has to practice so that his personality becomes refined, his character becomes refined, and all that, by doing all that, only the sattva component of the chitta increases. Now, sleep is a transition from the waking to dreaming to then dreamless sleep. Now, if we can increase the sattva content of our personality consciously by actively doing something during the waking state, it carries over. It carries over to the dream and then dreamless sleep. So, the entire idea of the Ashtanga Yoga is to increase sattva in the mind, so that finally it becomes so pure that the mind goes to the arrested state, which is just short of Samadhi, which is the highest state. So sattva can be increased by conscious practice, conscious disciplines, actions. What is the easiest thing that has been told in Ashtanga Yoga? Satya, truthfulness. If somebody holds to truthfulness, naturally the sattva component will increase. The other things are mentioned in yama and niyama. All those things actually try to increase our sattva component, make us better person. A person with more sattva guna is a most respected person, is a better person. His personality is developed than others. So we say that what is the distinction between the human and the other beings? The distinction actually comes in the excess of sattva, which is not there in other forms. And within humans also, the gradation comes with more and more sattva. So that is the goal of the Ashtanga Yoga, from the first step, which is yama, niyama, etc., to the highest step, that is the meditation and higher forms of meditation. Everything happens only by increasing the sattva component.
So, so you mentioned that by the conscious yoga practices, or it can be meditation practices or mindfulness practices, whatever it is, from the terminology, from the yoga perspective, there is an increasing in sattva, even during wake also, and probably during sleep also, it predominates along with the tamas, and we'll get the good sleep quality. So probably this will link to Dr. Martin's one of the slide where he mentioned that there is an increase in the lucidity among the long-term mindfulness meditation practitioners.
Right.
So from the yogic literature perspective, long-term practitioners are supposed to be more sattvic in nature. So I want to ask Dr. Martin, what is your experience in these lucid dreamers about their subjective sleep quality?
Yeah, that there has been quite a lot of discussion in the last 2 or 3 years in how far lucid dreaming might interfere with sleep quality, since this is a concern of many people who think that sleep is very inactive, and if you increase consciousness and cognition during sleep, that might interfere with sleep quality. There is, on the one hand, of course, lucid dreaming is something that even if in people who experience lucid dreaming is rather rare. So it happens once a week, once a month, and just for a couple of minutes. So most of the sleep is still non-lucid. But is more reassuring is that there are by now a couple of studies that looked into morning mood and morning vigilance after having a lucid dream or not. And it appears that people, if they wake up from a lucid dream or from a night where they had lucid dreams, they are in a happier mood. And they often feel more vigilant and more refreshed than out of sleep without lucid dreaming. So at least from that perspective, it appears to not interfere with sleep, but rather the opposite. The question is, however, if you try to force it with these different strategies, like waking yourself up in the middle of the night and stay awake for an hour, or if you take all kinds of like acoustic or electric brain stimulation, that might, of course, have some side effects that are completely independent of lucid dreaming. But lucid, just spontaneously experiencing lucid dreaming appears to be related with better morning mood after awakening. So I haven't heard the term of I slept happily, but it reminded me of these studies that out of a lucid, if you wake up from a lucid dream, that might come close to what I also would say I slept happily.
Okay, thank you. And I think if Dr. C.C. Roy, he has a question to Dr. Bala. Sir, you can unmute and ask the question. Dr. C.C. Roy?
Yeah,
He's a professor from National Institute of Advanced Studies.
Yeah, I mean, your elaboration on Advaita Vedanta, especially Mandukya Upanishad, is very much relevant in understanding the debate in quantum theory. You know, in quantum theory, the big challenge is how to understand the measurement problem. There also the object to be measured, to be observed, an observer, and what is the role of consciousness. So only thing I have some confusion whether you will use the word collapse of the three states, waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, or you can say it is already in there in pure consciousness without saying they are collapsing. Otherwise, it may lead to resolution of the big problem which we are facing in quantum theory. How, if you take a cat in a closed chamber and if you trigger the poisonous knob, then cat will be either in the dead state or in living state. But according to quantum theory, there is superposition principle. So cat, you can make a state with a linear combination of dead state and living state. So the problem is, as soon as you open the lid of the box, then you will either see dead state or living state, either of the two states. So now the scientists are divided. They are saying because of the inclusion of consciousness, this might happen. And some people are saying, no, we don't need the consciousness as a relevant part. But I think your elaboration will be much, this is a comment, not any question, will be much relevant in our discussions of the great debate is going on in quantum theory.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Lucid Roy, for this observation that you have made. In fact, if you go by Mandukya Upanishad and also by Shankara's commentary on it, it doesn't say that it collapses. Okay, yeah. Basically, the consciousness, pure consciousness that we are talking about is there in each one of these states that we are talking about: waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. But it is not limited to them alone. It is beyond them as well. That is how, when it is defined, this pure consciousness is defined. It is defined as not the waking state, not the dreaming state, and not the deep sleep as well, and not within them or beyond them as well. So that is how it is to be, it is to be understood as something like the reality that is Sat that we talk about. Basically, the problem that I must admit here is that even when I teach Indian philosophy, the philosophy of mind classes, it's impossible to translate certain things that we use in Sanskrit into English and communicate and teach the students about them, no? Because there is a distortion, major distortion that happens when we start speaking English and explaining things which were there in Upanishads in English. Okay, probably it's better if we speak in our own mother tongues. We would be able to communicate it in a better way than speaking in English.
That's a big problem. So nowadays we are studying Drisya Viveka, that text, and
that's a wonderful text.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for elaboration. And so, maybe
I would be happy to be a part of this reading of Drisya Viveka.
We have
because I am also reading that.
No, we have written something and published something in that direction. I will send it to you. Okay.
Yeah, please.
And
Dr. Roy, you have one more question to Ajata Chaitanya ji.
So, I mean, thank you also for your elaboration, but one small question. When you say asampragata samadhi, do you mean that cognitive function also is there?
Sir, as per definition of Vyasa in the commentary of the Yoga Sutras, asampragyata is a state where there is nothing sampragyata, that is nothing to be cognized, no cognition at all. So that is according to definition. Now, when there is nothing to know what exists, that we cannot say in this state, and there the Upanishads come and give the answer. At that time, there is the pure consciousness which is always there, and it is there alone when there is nothing to cognize, and that state. And it was always there, as Professor Balaganapati also mentioned, that it is there, it is always there. So whether we know or not, it is there. And when we are knowing other things, we are knowing by the virtue of the consciousness of that pure being. We are borrowing, as it were, from that and knowing other things. So when we are not borrowing, it alone exists.
You know, the problem is like the people who are, we are doing some research on meditation and neuronal correlates. People use different techniques of meditation, vipassana, sahaja yoga, heartfulness meditation, many types of meditation. But each type of meditation is usually connected to is a kind of cognitive activities, show different type of oscillations like alpha, beta, gamma, delta, etc. We are very much curious to know if there is no cognitive activity like nirvikalpa samadhi, then what happens to this existence of what type of oscillations? And I have not seen any paper on that, but whether from your perspective, you can give some insight. Because in some meditation, that gamma oscillation dominates. In some cases, alpha. So depending on the technique they use. But here in this state of meditation, as there is no cognitive function, so whether it is at all meaningful, or of course we can do experiments, but problem is to find a subject like Ramakrishna or Vivekananda, frankly speaking. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. So we know that to understand the neural correlates of deep states like Samadhi, we need an yogis who can reach that particular the state. So one again, Dr. Dressler, you mentioned about the possibility of lucidity during NREM sleep. Now, just a hypothetical question that I want to ask you is, does the lucidity during NREM sleep and the misstate perception of sleep type of insomnia, do they go together?
That's a very good question, and I'm not sure, but that might indeed be a very similar phenomenon. The obvious advantage of REM sleep for research is that we can be sure that someone is in REM sleep by looking at the muscle tone, which is completely flat, and therefore the rest of the brain and the mind can completely be awake or wake-like, and we still know the subject is certainly in sleep, and we can do the trick with the eye movements and so on. All of that is difficult during non-REM sleep, and therefore it's much more difficult to differentiate what is like some dissociated state, like or what kind of phenomenon is that. But that is a very, very interesting idea that indeed it might be very similar, that sleep stage misperception in non-REM sleep and lucid dreaming might be very similar phenomena indeed.
And do you feel that even lucidity during NREM sleep can also be trained? If so, what is your suggestions?
I mean, this is a bit of the hope of also many colleagues who try to get to this like as pure as possible states of consciousness, since during sleep the advantage obviously is that the outside world is shut off, and therefore the content is, if anything, internally generated. And during non-REM sleep, there's just less brain activity, and therefore there's less rich internal activity and content. therefore, like lucid dreamless sleep or witnessing sleep or something like that, like the best candidate for that would be non-REM sleep or maybe even deep sleep. However, with like these like higher cognitive processes still being active. And this is something that I would be super interested to really get more deeply into and study that. But again, quite difficult to find participants who are able to do this. And this is something where I would hope also that with like connections and collaborations with long-term meditators and monasteries, that there it might be possible to recruit participants who are able to maintain higher forms of consciousness while being in deep sleep.
Yeah. And one more thing that I have is, if at all, if you have a lucidity during REM sleep, so what could be the functional importance of lucid REM sleep?
That's also a very good question. And I think that the question is like a better phrasing of the question is, what is the function of non-lucid REM sleep? Since that is sort of the natural version. So lucid dreaming is such a rare state. Half of the population doesn't have it at all, and the other half has it very, very rarely. So there appears to be some function of non-lucidity that evolved, and that is sort of the meant to be sleep state or REM sleep state. And some debates are about the function of dreaming in general, and they're like the idea about threat simulation or social simulation is that dreaming is sort of a virtual reality or a training ground, a simulation of reality where we can train certain behaviors that are very dangerous to train during wakefulness. So it's very dangerous to train how to react to threats, and it's very dangerous to just do something completely weird in social situations. But during dreaming, we can do that, and we can try out new behaviors, and we can train these new behaviors in a completely safe environment. But it might be necessary that we are not, that we do not realize that we are in a dream. If we in a dream would always realize that all the other dream characters are just imagined by us, and if we would always realize that all the like nightmare content and the threats in a dream and the monsters chasing us are not real, then there would be no reason for us to like try hard and train and come up with something. And so far, it might well be that non-lucidity as the standard is something that evolved, and that there is an active suppression of these higher cognitive capacity during REM sleep. And during lucid dreaming, this suppression just fails to work.
Okay, we have one question. We have one question to Dr. Martin in the chat box. I'll read it out. Is it possible to be aware at the last moment where one transitions from wakefulness to sleep? Are people with this ability lucid dreamers?
Yes, there's one tradition in the lucid dreaming community. It's called wake-induced lucid dreaming, where people try exactly this, that they fall asleep, however, try to keep up their higher processes of consciousness, that they sort of observe their body falling asleep, but at the whole time stay conscious. And some people with training appear to be able to do this. This is sort of one of the two possibilities. The other is that from within a dream, you realize something is strange or this feels dreamlike, and then you get this insight, oh, this has to be a dream. And the first is that you really just like your body falls asleep, but you keep your mind awake. And apparently some people are able to do something like this.
Okay, so so there is one more question for you, Martin. If lucid dreaming is so rare, there's a question. If lucid dreaming is so rare, do you think it would have had an evolutionary advantage whatsoever? On the contrary, what evolutionary advantage would non-lucid dreaming have if it is for more prevalent?
Yeah, that's exactly what I've talked about. So that if you think that dreaming is a simulation of reality, then taking the simulation serious and taking it for real is helpful, and realizing that dreaming is just made up in your head while dreaming would have the disadvantage that you do not take it for real, and therefore do not like train hard to come up with new solutions for problems and new behaviors. So that is a bit speculative, but at least for me, that is a plausible explanation. The function of dreaming could be and why it typically is non-lucid.
So is there anything from our two other philosopher friends to discuss among the speakers?
Yeah, basically, I don't have anything, but I'm very much interested in the last part of your presentation, Martin, where you talked about meditative practices and then their influences on sleep and lucid sleep. So I would be interested to read something about that if you have published. So I would write to you separately on that. Thank you.
I think it has a great potential, and there are obvious both historical but also content-wise association between mindfulness during the day and well, mindfulness during the night actually, and there is very little research on that yet, at least neuroscientific research. There's probably plenty of theoretical research on that.
Yeah, I had come across in the recent past a group of scholars who were into Sanskrit, ancient Indian language. They were arguing that people who recite these Vedic mantras, because of the influence of the use of the language, which gives a kind of vibration within the body, creates within a vibration within the body, like creates a kind of equanimity within the body. Okay, and that's how it helps the people having a better sleep. So I don't know whether these are true or not, but I think, yeah, they're subject to verification.
Thank you, Dr. Bala. Okay, so I would like to have any, say, last comments from each of you. How do you think that to understand the consciousness to develop an empirical evidence, sleep can be a good model to understand the consciousness and to develop some empirical evidence? So on this question, I want to say 1 minute of your last concluding remarks. I would like to request Ajata Chaitanya ji to say his view on this.
So as we all know that we spend roughly about 1/3 of our life in sleep. Is a very important component of our life. So we have to make this important component very good, increase its quality. For that, the yogic practices in the other states, especially the waking state, has a very important role. If we live our waking state in a proper way, that is called as the yogic lifestyle, then it has a very good influence on the quality of sleep and the higher cognitive functions that take shape in sleep. So these are very intertwined. So to make our cognitive functions better and in general quality of life better, it is very important that we spend the waking state, the conscious state in a proper way, so that we also spend the sleep state in a good way.
Thank you. Dr. Bala, your concluding.
Yeah, if it is not from what I have presented so far, Advaita Vedanta, from a philosopher's perspective, what I believe is each one of us have a metaphysical system working and also an epistemology, which helps in constructing this metaphysics in terms of worldviews and in terms of belief systems that all of us have. So basically, if we understand that it is not just the biology that we have, it is also more than biology, something else that is also there. You call it, I don't even want to limit it to psychology. I want to go beyond that as well. Okay. So along with biology and psychology, if you agree that you have this metaphysical epistemological system that is working, which also influences your biology and psychology. So in that particular sense, I would believe that going by Advaita Vedanta, the self-reflectivity that it stresses as an instrument, a method of probing into oneself and trying to regulate one's own actions, thoughts, and then words. This is the one that helps one to have a peaceful day at the end of the day, peaceful night at the end of the day. So that is how, in Indian tradition, I was looking for a word for honesty. Honesty is the one that we talk about at the global level, but in India, you don't find any word for honesty. So what is honesty? When I try to understand it explanation, it says trying to be equanimity, trying to maintain equanimity of the thought, word, and action. So if you want to be honest, what is required is your actions, your thoughts, and your words are to be on the same line. Okay, so that's what basically it tries to put the psychology, metaphysics, and biology on the same plane, so that the equanimity is maintained, and this equanimity is the one which supports or prompts the good sleep. So that is how I would look at it from philosopher's perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dr. Martin, your concluding.
Yeah, like when it comes to consciousness and sleep, I think lucid dreaming is really a quite unique opportunity, since it allows that we switch from like different levels of consciousness into each other within the same biological state. So if we are in REM sleep, we are in a certain biological state, and if we from non-lucid to lucid dreaming, we like gain like levels of consciousness, so all these higher aspects of consciousness, while staying in the same biological state. And therefore, that is a unique opportunity to really, for the scientific study and neuroscientific study of the neurocorrelates of these higher aspects of consciousness, since it's a very clean switch. And the second aspect, or second conclusion, I think that there is really a huge untapped potential of these different traditions of mindfulness training and yogi practice and so on, and lucid dreaming and dreaming and the modern neuroscientific research on that. So they're like the last couple of decades, 90%, 95, 99% of all neuroscience of dreaming and sleep was centered on, well, the last couple of decades on Western traditions, while there's still like a huge potential and huge body of wisdom that we still could tap into and collaborate and associate with these like more modern neuroscientific line of research. And I think there's a lot to expect from such collaborations.
Thank you, Martin. So as all of you are aware that Center for Consciousness Studies at National Institute for Mental Health and Neurosciences. So primarily, we also in our work, we focus on sleep and cognition. And we have an enormous amount of work, especially understanding sleep and the effect of meditation on sleep. And with our leadership of Dr. Bindu, Madam. So a lot of, we have come up with a lot of publications also. So probably it is in the interest of all the audience, probably can get into those publications and read about what is our contribution in understanding the effect of meditation on sleep. So having said that, it was a wonderful session that we spent almost more than 2 hours now trying to understand the cognitive and the consciousness aspect of during sleep, which is not ventured much to gather the empirical, the evidences. So starting from yogic perspective to Advaitic perspective and from the neuroscience perspective. So it was, I hope it was a very good learning experience to all of us. So on behalf of teams Center for Consciousness Studies, I thank everybody, all the learner speakers who have shared their thoughts and ideas with us. Thank you very much. And I also thank all the participants who have been actively participating from last 2 days and also here. And also I would like to tell that at 6:30 p.m. of Indian Standard Time, we have one of the most eminent keynote address by Swami Sarvapriyananda, who will be sharing his ideas on understanding Indian models of consciousness from monistic and dualistic perspective. So thank you very much, and we'll meet at 6:30. Thank you. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Bala, sir. Thank you, Rajat Chaitanya. Thank you. And I also thank my colleague, Dr. Gulshan, to be with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.